George Washington was probably named after the lawyer George Eskridge, who raised Washington's mother when she was orphaned. Washington was born on his family's plantation along the southern bank of the Potomac River near the mouth of Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County, Virginia. According to the old-style calendar, his birth date was February 22, 1732, equivalent to February 11th in the modern calendar. 1752, England and its colonies adopted the new Gregorian calendar, replacing the old Julian calendar. He was baptized on April 5, 1732. According to Mildred Warner Washington, a descendant of King Edward III of England, George Washington's great-grandfather, Reverend Lawrence Washington, around 1602–1653, was a minister at All Saints' Church in Purley, Essex, England. He was dismissed when some congregation members accused him of being a frequent customer of taverns, not only drinking there himself daily, but also encouraging others to engage in such bad behavior. Around 1656, Washington's great-grandfather, John Washington, sailed to America with plans to stay for a short time to earn a shipment of tobacco. However, his ship sank shortly after setting sail back, so he remained in Virginia. There, he met and married Anne Pope, George Washington's great-grandmother. Augustine Washington, also known as Gus among friends, was a prominent plantation owner who spent most of his time acquiring and managing around 10,000 acres of land in the Potomac region, overseeing an ironworks and handling business affairs in England. Upon returning from a business trip in 1730, he discovered that his wife, Jane Butler Washington, had passed away in his absence. Just 11 months later, on June 6, 1731, he married Mary Ball, who would later give birth to George Washington. Augustine's busy business schedule often kept him away from home, leading young George to remember his father as a tall, gentle, and kind-hearted man. Augustine Washington passed away when George was just 11 years old. Mary Ball Washington, born in 1709 and passed away in 1789, lost her father at the age of 3 and her mother at the age of 12. She was under the guardianship of lawyer George Eskridge, as per her mother's will. Her relationship with George was strained. Despite not being poor, she often asked for money and goods from him. Mary complained to others that she was destitute and abandoned by her children, which made George feel ashamed. In 1765, while her son was serving the king in the war against the French and Native Americans during the Pontiac's War, enduring the hardships of camp life, she wrote to George asking for butter and a new housemaid. The animosity between mother and son persisted until her death from cancer in the first year of George's presidency. In his first marriage, George Washington's father had 2 half-brothers from a different mother, Lawrence Washington, who cared for George after their father passed away, and Augustine Austin Washington. He also had 3 half-siblings and a half-sister, Betty Lewis, Samuel Washington, John Augustine Jack Washington, the father of Supreme Court Justice Bushrod Washington, and Charles Washington, who founded the town of Charles in West Virginia. George Washington was related to many prominent historical figures. He was the uncle of President James Madison, who played a significant role in the early history of the United States. Washington's lineage also connects him as a 7th great-grandfather to Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. He was born in 1926 and has been the reigning monarch for several decades. Additionally, Washington was the 2nd great-grandfather of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, a controversial figure in American history due to his role in the Civil War. Furthermore, he is linked as a 6-time great-grandfather to Winston Churchill, the renowned British statesman who led the United Kingdom during World War II. These connections highlight the intricate relationships among historical figures and how their legacies intersect through generations. It is fascinating to explore these familial ties and consider the impact individuals like George Washington have had on shaping history. George Washington did not have any biological children, so he did not have any direct descendants. However, he played a significant role in the lives of his wife Martha's 2 children from her previous marriage to John Parke Custis. Washington helped raise Martha Parke Custis and John Jackie Parke Custis as if they were his own. Martha Parke Custis went on to marry Thomas Peter, while Jackie Parke Custis married Eleanor Calvert. Their daughter Mary Anna Randolph Custis married Robert E. Lee, who became a famous Confederate general during the American Civil War. George Washington's influence extended to their descendants through the marriage between Mary Custis and Robert E. Lee. The Lee family has since become an essential part of American history, with many notable figures tracing their lineage back to George Washington through this connection. George Washington was a robust man, standing at approximately 188 meter tall. He weighed nearly 80 kilos in his prime, which later increased to over 90 kilos. He had a good posture, broad, muscular shoulders, large hands and feet, shoe size 13, a long face with high cheekbones, a prominent straight nose, a strong chin, and blue-gray eyes under thick eyebrows. He had dark brown hair that he powdered and neatly tied on formal occasions. His white skin bore scars from smallpox he had as a child. Washington lost his teeth, likely due to gingivitis, and wore dentures. Dr. Rydar Sognaes, former dean of the University of California, Los Angeles Dental School, extensively studied Washington's denture bridge. Contrary to popular belief, Washington had multiple sets of dentures made from materials such as lead, ivory, human teeth, and cow teeth, but not wood as commonly thought. During his presidential inauguration, Washington had one natural tooth and his false teeth. He started wearing reading glasses during the American Revolution and was known for dressing fashionably. As a private and reserved individual, he only shared his emotions with a few friends. Those who didn't like him perceived his serious demeanor as arrogance. To Washington, life was a significant mission that required dedicated and diligent effort. He prioritized work over leisure activities. While generally friendly, he struggled to manage his temper and occasionally found himself without a prepared speech. He preferred to express his thoughts in writing, but when he spoke, he did so candidly and directly, maintaining eye contact. Biographer Douglas Southall Freeman acknowledged that Washington's desire for wealth sometimes made him appear greedy and argumentative. Even after achieving financial stability, Washington insisted on receiving exact payment for all debts owed to him and was committed to earning everything through honest means. However, neither his ambition for success nor avarice ever threatened his integrity. You are watching a video on Biography Journey channel. If you like this video, please give us a comment and subscribe to Biography Journey channel to help us reach 100,000 subscribe. Thank you very much. Washington's childhood is shrouded in mystery. The famous tale of the cherry tree incident, where he couldn't tell a lie, was fabricated by Parson Weems. His half-brother Lawrence, who was significantly older, had the most significant influence on young George. Orphaned at 11, George saw Lawrence as a father figure and tried to emulate him. The young boy was enthusiastic about the idea when Lawrence suggested a job at sea for George. However, their mother, Mary, strongly opposed it. George respected his parents' wishes and gave up the opportunity despite his interest. At 16, he went to live with Lawrence at Mount Vernon, named after Admiral Edward Vernon. While at Mount Vernon, George developed his surveying skills and anticipated inheriting Ferry Farm on his 21st birthday. This estate, near Fredericksburg, had been in the family since 1738 and was where his mother lived until her passing. It comprised 4,000 acres of land, 3 lots in Fredericksburg, around 100 enslaved people, and part of his father's private property. The widow Washington decided not to send her eldest son, George, to school in England as his late father had. Instead, she opted for a more unconventional approach to education, commonly seen in colonial Virginia. It is still being determined who exactly taught George, but by the age of 11, he had already become proficient in reading, writing, and math. Math was George's most vital subject, and he applied his skills to surveying, a popular profession in colonial Virginia, where land ownership was a key measure of wealth. Different from many of his peers involved in drafting the U.S. Constitution in 1787, Washington never had the opportunity to learn French, which was considered the language of diplomacy at the time. Additionally, he did not attend college. Despite these limitations, Washington's mathematical abilities and practical knowledge of surveying significantly shaped his early career and ultimately his legacy as one of America's founding fathers. Although he was a member of the Episcopal Church, religion did not hold a prominent place in his life. Instead, he focused on his moral principles based on his understanding of right and wrong. These principles guided his actions, and he adhered to them rigorously. In his writings, he seldom referenced God or Jesus directly. Instead, he spoke of God as a mystical force that transcends human existence and has the power to influence our lives. He viewed fate as an unstoppable and overwhelming force that human willpower cannot overcome alone. His belief in fate was unwavering, and he saw it as a fundamental aspect of the universe that governs all aspects of life. Despite his religious affiliation, his perspective on spirituality was more abstract and focused on the cosmic forces at play in the world. His views on religion and spirituality were shaped by his unique interpretation of morality and fate, which he believed to be paramount in guiding human behavior and shaping our lives. In his youth, Washington picked up billiards as a hobby and enjoyed playing cards. However, fox hunting was one of his favorite pastimes, which he enjoyed immensely. As he grew older, he developed a routine of reading the newspaper to his wife every evening, showing his commitment to staying informed and sharing that knowledge with his loved ones. Additionally, Washington made it a point to engage in daily exercise, recognizing the importance of maintaining his physical health. This dedication to staying active and informed showcases his disciplined and well-rounded approach to life. Washington found himself at a loss for words and felt embarrassed in the presence of the girls. At 16 or 17, he expressed his sorrow through poorly rhymed verses, lamenting his inability to confess his love despite feeling great pain inside. Before marrying Martha, Washington faced romantic setbacks. One such disappointment was with Betsy Fauntleroy, the daughter of a judge who represented Richmond County, Virginia, in Congress. At 20 years old, Washington tried to court her when she was 16, but was repeatedly rejected, eventually leading him to give up. During a trip to Boston in 1756 to address military matters, Washington visited New York, where he met Mary Phillips, a 26-year-old woman, and the daughter of Frederick Phillips, a wealthy landowner. Washington stayed in the city for a week, possibly captivated by Mary's charm or her family's vast land holdings totaling 51,000 acres. He reportedly proposed to her, but Mary later married Roger Morris, both loyalists during the American Revolution. George Washington developed solid feelings for Sally Fairfax, the wife of his friend George William Fairfax. Despite never acting on their emotions, they exchanged passionate letters expressing their love and admiration for each other. In a letter to Sally in 1758, Washington confessed his love, even though he was engaged to Martha then. He expressed his feelings cautiously, fearing that the letter might be intercepted. Washington's love for Sally caused him great distress, especially when he had to suppress his emotions, as the Fairfax couple did not support his vision for American independence. In 1773, amidst growing tensions between the American colonies and Britain, Sally and George Fairfax moved to England, where they remained loyal to the British Crown for the rest of their lives. The unrequited love between Washington and Sally Fairfax remained a poignant chapter in Washington's life, showcasing his emotional depth and inner struggles. George Washington, aged 26, married Martha Dandridge Custis, aged 27, a widow with 2 children. The wedding occurred on January 6, 1759, at Martha's White House estate by the Potomac River in Virginia. Martha, born on June 21, 1731, was the daughter of John Dandridge and Frances Jones Dandridge, both planters. Martha was described as petite and attractive and known for her practical and rational nature, though not exceptionally intelligent. At 18, she married Daniel Jones Custis, a prominent plantation owner with vast land holdings of over 17,000 acres. They had 4 children, but only 2 survived to adulthood. When her husband passed away in 1757 without a will, Martha became one of the wealthiest widows in Virginia. It is believed that George Washington had known Martha and her late husband for some time. In March 1758, Washington visited Martha at the White House estate twice, and during the second visit, an engagement agreement was reached, or at least Martha promised to consider his proposal. Their wedding was lavish, with Washington dressed in a blue and silver suit with gold breeches adorned with red trim. Following their marriage ceremony officiated by Bishop Peter Mossam, the couple honeymooned at the White House before settling at Washington's Mount Vernon estate. Their marriage appeared stable, free from issues of infidelity or conflicts. During the American Revolution, Martha endured many hardships to visit her husband at military headquarters. As the First Lady, Mrs. Washington played a significant role in organizing state events in New York and Philadelphia, where the capital was temporarily located before moving to Washington, D.C. in 1800 during John Adams' presidency. After George Washington's passing in 1799, Martha experienced deep sorrow and passed away on May 22, 1802. George Washington was a military leader who served in the Virginia militia between 1752 and 1758. He started as a major and worked up to colonel during this time. Later, during the American Revolutionary War, he became the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army from 1775 to 1783, ultimately achieving the rank of general. His leadership and strategic skills were crucial in securing victory for the American colonies against the British forces. George Washington's military service played a significant role in shaping the history of the United States. In 1749, George Washington started his first job as a land surveyor in Culpeper County, Virginia. He had gained experience the year before during an expedition across the Blue Ridge for Lord Fairfax. 2 years later, he went to Barbados with his brother Lawrence, who was seeking a cure for tuberculosis in the climate there. Unfortunately, George contracted smallpox and feared for his life. After Lawrence and his daughter passed away in 1752, George inherited Mount Vernon, which he managed well and found solace in from the stresses of war and community life. During the French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763, Washington received his first military commission as a major in the Virginia militia in 1752. Governor Robert Dinwiddie then sent him on a mission from October 1753 to January 1754 to deliver a request to the French at Le Boeuf Fortress, asking them to leave British-claimed territory. When the French refused, they clashed with the Ohio Company, a group of Virginians wanting western lands, leading to the French construction of Fort Duquesne in present-day Pittsburgh. In March 1754, Washington was promoted to lieutenant colonel and oversaw the building of Fort Necessity in what is now Fayette County, Pennsylvania. In July 1754, George Washington had to give up his outpost position to the French and Indian forces, leading to a defeat that gave France control of the area. He resigned later that year because junior officers claimed higher ranks because they were British regulars. In 1755, he returned to work under General Edward Braddock, who was fatally wounded in battle. Washington then tried to lead a retreat in an organized manner and was promoted to colonel in August. In December 1758, Washington left the militia after being elected to the Virginia legislature. From 1759 to 1774, he served as a member of the Legislative Yuan. He opposed British colonial policies and became the leader of an association formed during a session of the Legislative Yuan. The association aimed to find effective ways to boycott British imports. Washington supported reducing trade but disagreed with completely suspending trade with Britain. He also did not approve of the Boston Tea Party in December 1773. Washington soon realized that he could not reconcile with his mother country. In 1770, he embarked on a 9-week journey to Ohio, where he contemplated staking claim to over 20,000 acres of land for himself, and even more for his fellow soldiers who had fought alongside him in the French and Indian War. He took the lead in advocating for compensation for Virginia veterans. Reflecting on his efforts, Washington later wrote that no land acquisitions would have been possible without his constant vigilance. Delegate to the Continental Congress, 1774–1775. As a member of Virginia's delegation to the First and Second Continental Congresses, George Washington was actively involved in committees focused on preparing for war. He chaired a committee that explored ways to gather guns and ammunition for the upcoming revolution. While he initially supported peaceful resolutions with Britain, he soon realized these efforts were ineffective. Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the Revolution, 1775–1783. In June 1775, John Adams of Massachusetts strongly nominated Washington to lead the newly established Continental Army. The delegates unanimously chose Washington due to his military experience and the desire to have a prominent Virginian at the helm of the mainly northern-led struggle. As Commander-in-Chief, Washington faced challenges leading an inexperienced and undisciplined army against well-trained British regulars and Hessian mercenaries. Despite early successes like driving the British out of Boston in March 1776, setbacks such as losing New York City dashed hopes of a swift victory. Americans' morale was significantly boosted when General Washington led his troops across the Delaware River into New Jersey, achieving victories at Trenton in December 1776 and Princeton in January 1777. However, subsequent severe defeats at Brandywine in September 1777 and Germantown in October 1777, along with the fall of Philadelphia, led to a decline in Washington's prestige in Congress. Richard Henry Lee, Benjamin Rush, and others conspired to remove Washington from his position and replace him with General Horatio Gates, who had successfully defeated General John Burgoyne at the Battle of Saratoga in October 1777. Washington's supporters in Congress, known as the Conway Cabal, opposed this move. Despite these challenges, Washington persevered. The outlook for victory appeared bleak as he established winter quarters at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, in December 1777. Washington commended the soldiers who endured harsh conditions at Valley Forge, lacking warm clothes, blankets, and shoes. Despite marching in frost and snow with bleeding feet and enduring hunger and hardships, they showed remarkable patience and obedience without complaint. While some expressed discontent about the lack of necessities, there was no desertion or rebellion. Patriotism and trust in Washington helped them persevere. The soldiers survived on meager meals like pepper soup during the severe winter, with many succumbing to the harsh conditions. However, news of France recognizing American independence in May 1778 and the arrival of Baron Friedrich von Steuben to train them uplifted their spirits. By June 1778, with a reinvigorated army, they continued the fight against the British, culminating in the victory at Yorktown in October 1781, where General Cornwallis surrendered. General Washington issued strict but non-punitive surrender conditions after the British Army under General Cornwallis surrendered in 1781. The conditions included surrendering all weapons and supplies, returning any booty taken, allowing British soldiers to keep personal belongings, officers to keep sidearms, and British doctors to care for their sick and injured. Instead of leading his army to the agreed surrender location, Cornwallis sent his Deputy General Charles O'Hara. When O'Hara met Washington and the Comte de Rochambeau along the road, he mistook Rochambeau for the commander-in-chief. Rochambeau quickly pointed to Washington, and O'Hara, a bit embarrassed, turned to the American general. Not wanting to deal with someone of lower rank, Washington asked O'Hara to surrender his sword of surrender to General Benjamin Lincoln, his aide. Washington proudly informed them of Cornwallis' surrender in his victory announcement to Congress. It credited the enthusiasm of every soldier and officer in the coalition army for the event's success. He expressed optimism for the future and looked forward to further achievements. After the peace treaty was signed in November 1783, Washington resigned from his position and returned home to his Mount Vernon estate. George Washington, a Virginia delegate, was elected president of the Constitutional Convention in 1787 with solid support. He was a proponent of a powerful federal government during the convention. Following the convention, he worked towards getting the Constitution ratified in Virginia. Recently uncovered notes by Georgia delegate Abraham Baldwin, published in 1987, reveal that Washington expressed doubts about the longevity of the Constitution in private, suggesting it might only endure up to 20 years. You are watching a video on Biography Journey channel. If you like this video, please give us a comment and subscribe to Biography Journey channel to help us reach 100,000 subscribe. Thank you very much. George Washington, a Federalist, was the obvious choice for the first President of the United States. He was a proven leader who had played a crucial role in achieving independence for the country. Despite his reluctance for attention, Washington's popularity and influence were so great that all 69 electors voted for him, making him the unanimous choice. Washington's leadership qualities and ability to unite different factions in the young nation made him the ideal candidate for the presidency. His support extended across all 10 states that had ratified the Constitution then. Even though some states like North Carolina, Rhode Island, and New York had yet to participate in the electoral process fully, Washington's unanimous election demonstrated the trust and confidence that the people had in him. John Adams from Massachusetts received the second highest number of votes and became the vice president. Washington's presidency set a precedent for future leaders and established the importance of unity and strong leadership in the new nation. His unanimous election remains a testament to his character and the respect he commanded among his peers. During this period, the Democratic and Republican parties were gaining more influence and power in the political landscape of the United States. Despite this, George Washington remained a highly respected and popular figure. In the election, he again received unanimous support from all 15 states, securing 132 votes from the Electoral College. This overwhelming victory demonstrated the trust and confidence that the American people had in Washington's leadership and vision for the country. It also highlighted his ability to unite the nation and garner widespread bipartisan support. John Adams, hailing from Massachusetts, received the second highest votes with 77, securing his position as vice president for another term. The election results solidified Washington's legacy as a unifying figure in American politics and set a precedent for future leaders to aspire to. New York City, April 30th, 1789. When I was first honored to be called to serve my fatherland, the night before the arduous war to win the freedom of this country, began the light that would shine upon me in every mission. The case I was about to undertake told me I would not be allowed to ask for monetary compensation. Now, still with what I thought that day to come to that determination, I need to refuse, at least for myself, any personal salary, money that can be indispensable, including the regular provision for the office of the President. At the same time, I also hope that the calculation of expenses for the position I am currently assuming during the time I am in office will be limited to be consistent with the interests of the public. Philadelphia, March 4th, 1793. This is the shortest inaugural address, only 135 words. Dear fellow citizens, I have once again been chosen by the country to shoulder the duties of a president. I hope to express the great significance of this special honor for which I stand here, with the trust that all of United America has placed in me. As the Constitution requires, I shall be sworn in before being subject to any formal law applicable to the President. The oath I am about to take in the presence of all of you is this: during my time in office, if at any time you discover that I have acted intentionally in violation of the laws said above, I not only have to suffer the penalties prescribed by the Constitution, but also have to endure all the reprimands of all those who are witnessing today's solemn ceremony. Vice President John Adams, 1735–1826, Massachusetts, time 1789. Minister of Foreign Affairs, Thomas Jefferson, 1743–1826, from Virginia, served from 1790–1793. Edmund Jennings Randolph, 1753–1813, from Virginia, served from 1794–1795. He was the author of the Randolph or Virginia Plan and supported large states at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. He resigned as Attorney General and did not take sides in the conflict between Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. Criticized by supporters of both Jefferson and Hamilton, he faced unfounded accusations of using his position for personal gain, leading to his resignation. Timothy Pickering, 1745–1829, from Massachusetts, served from 1795–1800. He transitioned from Secretary of War to Secretary of State and remained loyal to Hamilton, serving under the Adams administration. Minister of Finance, Alexander Hamilton, born around 1755 and passing in 1804 in New York State, was a key figure from 1789 to 1795. He was known as George Washington's most trusted advisor, praising British institutions and excelling in political strategy. Hamilton saw his role in government as akin to that of a prime minister, with influence in economics and diplomacy, law and long-term social planning. Hamilton advocated for a strong central government by diminishing state powers. He laid the financial groundwork for the nation by implementing taxation to eliminate the national debt and establishing a national bank. Additionally, he supported tariffs to shield domestic production from foreign competition. His vision for America included transitioning from an agrarian society to an industrial powerhouse, implementing a national transportation system to boost trade and reduce regional gaps, ensuring a robust national defense, and maintaining a stable monetary system. Even after stepping down, Hamilton remained involved in national affairs, advising Washington and his successor, Oliver Wolcott. He even assisted in crafting Washington's farewell address. Despite his conservative stance, Hamilton faced intense animosity from Thomas Jefferson and his followers. Oliver Wolcott, born in 1760 and passing in 1833 in Connecticut, served from 1795 to 1800. A lawyer and Hamilton supporter, he became Secretary of the Treasury under President Adams. Wolcott also held the position of Minister of War. Henry Knox, 1750–1806, from Massachusetts, was General Washington's artillery commander and close advisor during the American Revolution. He was also the Secretary of War under the Federal Charter. Fort Knox is named after him in recognition of his contributions. Timothy Pickering, 1745–1829, from Massachusetts, a lawyer and veteran of the American Revolution, played a crucial role in strengthening the Navy during his tenure from January 1795 to December 1795. He resigned as Minister of War to take up the Minister of Foreign Affairs position. James McHenry, 1753–1816, from Maryland, served from 1796–1800, worked as a surgeon during the American Revolution, and was a prisoner of war. He continued his service as Secretary of War in the Adams administration, with Fort McHenry in Baltimore named in his honor. As for the Ministers of Justice, Edmund Jennings Randolph, 1753–1813, from Virginia, serving from 1789–1794, assisted in drafting President Washington's Declaration of Neutrality. Despite his opinion that establishing a national bank was unconstitutional, he resigned and became Minister of Foreign Affairs. William Bradford, 1755–1795, from Pennsylvania, serving during 1794 to 1795, was appointed while serving as a judge on the state Supreme Court. Charles Lee, 1758–1815, from Virginia, serving from 1795 to 1801, advocated for the U.S. to abandon neutrality and declare war on France, but his efforts were unsuccessful. He later served as Attorney General in the Adams administration. Currency President Washington emphasized the importance of establishing a solid foundation from the beginning of his administration to have a lasting impact. After consulting with his ministers, he carefully and realistically added details to the primary government structure outlined in the Constitution, similar to how he worked with the War Council during the American Revolution. He advised future presidents to consult with their cabinet regularly. Congress respected Washington's decisions and did not extensively question his duties, allowing him to choose his cabinet. The president often assigned additional responsibilities to the National Assembly, even when the opposition held most seats. During Washington's presidency, the president had no specified term limit. Initially considering a single term, he decided on a two-term limit to prevent the government from collapsing due to a lack of leadership continuity. When selecting a successor for Chief Justice John Jay, Washington broke tradition by choosing someone outside the court rather than promoting from within. This decision set a precedent for future presidents to have a wider pool of candidates to choose from, focusing on young and talented individuals rather than limiting choices to older judges. Red Indian Event. In 1791, President Washington tasked General Arthur St. Clair with leading an army to subdue Native Americans who were resisting white settlement in the Northwest Territory. However, St. Clair failed and was defeated by Miami leader Little Turtle on the Wabash River. Following this defeat, Washington turned to Revolutionary War veteran Mad Anthony Wayne for assistance. Before engaging in battle, Wayne spent months training the regular army for combat against the Native Americans. Wayne strategically deployed troops and built fortresses, and on August 20, 1794, he successfully defeated Little Turtle's forces at the Battle of Fallen Timbers near present-day Toledo, Ohio. This victory led to the signing of the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, where the defeated Indian tribes were compelled to relinquish the disputed Northwest Territory to the United States government and relocate westward. President Washington also attempted to establish peace through diplomacy with the Creek tribe and other southern Indian tribes, though with limited success. In 1792, he hosted a reception for chiefs of the Southern Six Indian Tribes Confederacy, including Seneca leader Red Jacket, who was honored with a silver medal by Washington. Red Jacket, who had previously fought against Washington's army during the Revolutionary War, later allied with the American people in the War 1812. Neutrality Declaration, 1793. In 1793, amidst the war between France and several other European nations, President Washington declared that the United States would maintain peaceful and impartial relations with the warring parties. Though he did not explicitly use the term neutral, his intention was clear. Some critics argued that this statement went against America's commitment to its first ally, France. However, this declaration helped the United States avoid a war for which it was ill-prepared. French Ambassador Edmond Genet disregarded this policy, tried to incite pro-French sentiment among Americans, and organized U.S. hunting ships to harass British vessels. These actions led President Washington to expel Genet from the country. Whiskey Rebellion, 1794. In 1794, President Washington approved a tax on alcohol to aid in paying off the national debt and strengthening the country's economic foundation. Pennsylvania farmers often used corn to make whiskey during this period to avoid transportation costs when selling grain at the market. They protested and refused to pay the taxes. Following Alexander Hamilton's advice, Washington dispatched 15,000 militiamen to the region and personally inspected the troops at their training grounds. This decisive action helped the federal government successfully navigate its first significant challenge. Critics of the Jay Treaty, signed in 1795, were vocal in opposing President Washington's decision to agree with Great Britain. The treaty aimed to avoid potential conflicts with Britain and compel them to withdraw troops from outposts in the Northwest American Territory, as outlined in the Treaty of Paris that ended the Revolutionary War. Under the terms of the Jay Treaty, British troops were allowed to control American waters alongside American troops. British Navy had the authority to inspect and seize any American ship suspected of carrying contraband to the American coast where British troops were stationed. The definition of contraband was broad and included essential goods like food. One unresolved issue in the treaty was the matter of conscription. The once British, always British policy meant that even if a British resident became an American citizen, they could still be forced into the British Royal Navy if found on an American ship searched by the British Navy. Despite these contentious points and escalating tensions with France, the Jay Treaty postponed conflict with Britain until 1812, when the United States was more prepared militarily. When the U.S. Senate approved the treaty, the House of Representatives requested access to all related negotiation documents. President Washington refused, citing constitutional provisions that only the Senate can ratify treaties. This set a precedent for future presidents to reject similar requests from Congress. The Pinckney Treaty of 1795 improved relations between the United States and Spain. It established a boundary line at the 31st parallel separating the two countries. It granted American ships the right to dock freely at any port along the Mississippi River, including New Orleans, for trade. President Washington also enacted several significant laws during his tenure. In 1789, federal and state officials required an oath of allegiance. The first tariff system aimed to protect domestic manufacturers. Departments of State, War, and Treasury were established. A Minister of Post Office was appointed. The Federal Supreme Court, Circuit Courts, Regional Federal Courts, and Attorney General were created under the Courts Act, with Washington appointing the judges. The first federal census was conducted in 1790. Laws protecting patent and copyright rights were implemented. The capital was moved to Philadelphia in 1790 and then to Washington, D.C., 10 years later. The Bank of the United States was established in 1791. An order of succession to the presidency was determined after the vice president. The Philadelphia Mint was established in 1792. In 1795, the nationality law extended the settlement period from 2 to 5 years. You are watching a video on Biography Journey channel. If you like this video, please give us a comment and subscribe to Biography Journey channel to help us reach 100,000 subscribe. Thank you very much. In 1796, George Washington delivered a famous farewell speech, which he did not present publicly, but published in the American Daily Advertiser on September 17th. In his address, Washington cautioned against the dangers of partisan politics and interference from foreign alliances. Throughout his first term as president, he worked to prevent the growth of political divisions, a trend that only ceased when he agreed to serve a second term. Shortly after announcing his retirement from the presidency, a partisan conflict erupted between the Federalists, led by Hamilton and Adams, and the Democratic Republicans, headed by Jefferson. His warning for the United States to avoid entanglement in European conflicts was particularly noteworthy in Washington's speech. He advised prioritizing minimal political ties with other nations while honoring existing commitments faithfully. Over the following century, isolationism remained essential to American foreign policy. During this period, Vermont joined the Union in 1791, followed by Kentucky in 1792 and Tennessee in 1796. The Bill of Rights passed in 1791 consists of the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. These amendments guarantee various freedoms such as religion, speech, press, petition, and the right to own weapons. They also protect against unreasonable search and seizure and self-incrimination, ensure fair trials and jury participation, and prohibit cruel and unusual punishment. The Ninth Amendment acknowledges rights that are not explicitly stated, while the 10th reserves powers to states that are not given to the federal government. Regarding the appointment of Supreme Court judges, John Jay, 1745-1829, from New York, served as the first Chief Justice from 1789 to 1795, establishing trial procedures and negotiating the Jay Treaty before becoming Governor of New York. John Rutledge, 1739 to 1800, from South Carolina, was a judge from 1789 to 1791 and briefly appointed Chief Justice in 1795, but was vetoed by the Senate. William Cushing, 1732-1810, from Massachusetts, served as a judge from 1789 to 1810, and is known as the only justice to wear a wig, a tradition among British lawyers. James Wilson, 1742–1798, from Pennsylvania, an immigrant from Scotland who signed the Declaration of Independence, served as a judge from 1789 to 1798. His decision in Chisholm, Georgia, led to the 11th Amendment in 1795, overturning the ruling allowing citizens of one state to sue another. John Blair, 1732–1800, was a judge from Virginia who served on the Supreme Court from 1789 to 1796. He was a close friend of George Washington's. Both were Virginia delegates to the Constitutional Convention. Blair brought his extensive experience in the Virginia courts to his work on the Supreme Court. James Iredell, 1751–1799, was a judge from North Carolina who served on the Supreme Court from 1790 to 1799. As an English immigrant, he was the youngest member of the first Supreme Court at 38. His dissenting opinion in Chisholm v. Georgia in 1793 laid the foundation for the 11th Amendment 1795. Thomas Johnson, 1732–1819, was a judge from Maryland who served on the Supreme Court from 1791 to 1793. A friend of Washington since the Revolutionary War, he was the first governor of Maryland and Chief Justice of the Maryland State Court. Johnson resigned from the Supreme Court due to health reasons. William Patterson, 1745–1806, was a judge from New Jersey who served on the Supreme Court from 1793 to 1806. He was critical in drafting the Judiciary Act of 1789, establishing the federal court system. In Van Horn's Lessee v. Dorrance in 1795, Patterson asserted the Supreme Court's power to declare state laws unconstitutional, setting a precedent for judicial review. Samuel Chase, 1741–1811, was a judge from Maryland who served on the Supreme Court from 1796 to 1811. Known for his hot temper and sharp tongue, Chase faced impeachment by the House of Representatives in 1803 after attacking President Jefferson. Despite being convicted, the Senate fell 4 votes short of the majority for sentencing. In Ware v. Hilton in 1796, Chase affirmed the supremacy of national treaties over state laws. Chase remains the only judge in the federal Supreme Court to be convicted. Oliver Ellsworth, 1745–1807, Connecticut, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court from 1796 to 1800. He was the principal architect of the Judiciary Act 1789, which created the federal court system. In the case of the United States government versus La Vengeance, 1796, he spoke on behalf of the majority about extending federal authority to all inland rivers and lakes. Washington, ranked second out of 31 presidents and second out of 5 great presidents, was placed above Franklin Roosevelt but behind Lincoln. After retiring on March 4, 1797, he returned to Mount Vernon, overseeing renovations to his home. Despite leaving national affairs to others, Washington remained attentive to changes in the country. When tensions between the US and France rose due to the XYZ event, Washington was appointed Lieutenant General and Commander-in-Chief of the American Army on July 4, 1789, a position unique to him as a former president. He accepted the role with conditions, vowing to only engage in battle if the country was invaded and having approval over the general staff structure. In his last year, financial difficulties arose for Washington. Debts from real estate transactions, increasing taxes, and expenses for entertaining guests led him to borrow money from a bank at 67, marking the first time he had to do so. On the evening of December 14, 1799, at Mount Vernon in Virginia, after 10 p.m., George Washington, the first President of the United States, passed away. 2 days prior, on December 12th, he had been riding his horse around his farm when the weather turned cold, with snow, sleet, and rain falling. Despite returning home 5 hours later in wet clothes, he continued his activities. The following morning, Washington woke up with a sore throat and hoarseness, which worsened throughout the day. In the early hours of December 14th, he woke up feeling extremely cold and having difficulty speaking and breathing. 3 doctors attended to him: his physician James Craik, along with specialists Gustavus Richard Brown and Elisha Cullen Dick, who diagnosed him with purulent tonsillitis after conducting blood tests. Despite attempts to alleviate his symptoms with various remedies, including a potion and emetic, Washington's condition did not improve. His pulse remained weak, and treatments like blistering and poultices proved ineffective. Eventually, Washington requested the doctors to stop treating him. Later that night, around 10 o'clock, in a weak voice, Washington informed Tobias Lear, his adjutant, that he was about to pass away and requested a simple burial, asking for his coffin to be kept for at least 2 days after his death. Lear acknowledged his wishes, to which Washington responded with "very good" as his final words, before peacefully passing away while the doctor was checking his pulse. After Washington's death, a lock of his hair was cut off, and his body was placed in a mahogany coffin engraved with the words "Surge ad Judicium" and "Gloria Deo." Bishop Thomas Davis conducted his funeral on December 18th, which was not as simple as Washington had requested. Mourners walked between 2 lines of soldiers while a band played sad music. Gunfire from a warship in the Potomac River port paid tribute. The Masonic Society, of which Washington was a member, sent representatives to honor him. He was laid to rest in the family burial plot at Mount Vernon. In his 42-page will from July 1799, Washington granted his wife rights to his land valued over $500,000. He freed his valet William and provided an annual pension. Other enslaved people were to be freed after Martha's passing. His Bank of Alexandria funds were designated for a school for poor children and Potomac Company money for a national university. He forgave debts owed by his brother Samuel and brother-in-law Bartholomew Dandridge. His assistant Tobias Lear lived rent-free in his house. Bushrod Washington inherited his Mount Vernon home and belongings. His grandchildren, Nellie Lewis and George Washington Parke Custis, inherited large portions of his land. Various items like a gold-tipped cane from Benjamin Franklin, furniture from Dr. Craik, and steel guns from Lafayette were distributed among family and friends. Nephews received swords with a condition to only draw them in self-defense or national defense, valuing honor over shedding blood. In 1775, John Adams called for George Washington's nomination as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, praising his strategic talent, combat experience, and perfect character. Adams believed that Washington would unify the American people and gather the strength of all the colonies better than anyone else. In 1780, Benjamin Franklin expressed admiration for Washington in Europe, stating that despite attempts by jealous individuals to tarnish his reputation, Washington's merit shone through. Franklin believed that Washington's legacy would endure for generations, with future voices praising his virtues and military leadership. John Marshall acknowledged Washington's unparalleled contribution to the creation of the United States, attributing independence and freedom in the Western Hemisphere to his efforts. Marshall emphasized that Washington's impact on the nation was unmatched by any other individual. Henry Light Horse Harry Lee, in 1799, remembered Washington as the most incredible man in war and peace, highlighting his enduring influence in the hearts of all Americans. Lee emphasized Washington's grace and leadership as qualities that defined him as a remarkable figure in American history. The Aurora newspaper in Philadelphia, 1796, criticized George Washington, stating that if any nation was corrupted and deceived by one man, it was America by Washington. The newspaper called for Washington's character to serve as a cautionary example for future generations, warning against idolizing any individual. Thomas Jefferson also expressed his discontent with Washington in 1796 after Washington supported Jay's Treaty. Jefferson accused Washington of aligning with a monarchical, aristocratic Anglican party that aimed to reshape American institutions similar to those of the English government. Jefferson lamented the betrayal of religious beliefs and the loss of esteemed individuals who had once been leaders on the battlefield and in command, but ultimately met their demise under the British Army's sword. When he assumed the presidency, he sought excessive praise and flattery. He traveled extensively throughout America, searching for these flattering words, basking in titles like James II. His public persona was a complex blend of intelligence and cunning, often veering into hypocrisy. It became challenging to differentiate between his true character and the facade he presented. "You have shown ingratitude towards your friends, just as you did to me when I needed help. You come across as hypocritical before others, leaving the world unsure whether to label you a traitor or an impostor. I am left to ponder if you have abandoned your moral principles or never possessed them in the first place." Thomas Paine, in an open letter to Washington, 1796. Getting to know someone is easy, but getting rid of that person is very difficult, even if right after getting to know each other, you see how boring and useless that person is. Be polite to everyone, but only a few friends. Let those few be thoroughly tested before you truly trust them. Close friendship is like a tree that only slowly grows. The sword is the final solution to protect our freedom, so it must be the first thing to remove when that freedom has been firmly established. 1776. Precedent is dangerous. Let a strong hand hold the reins of government and make it strong. Any action that violates the Constitution must be strictly handled. If the Constitution has errors, it must be amended and supplemented, but do not let the Constitution be trampled on while it still exists. 1786. Political parties form factions, giving each faction a special force, carrying their party's ideology, aspirations, and will instead of the entire people's ideology, aspirations, and will. Clan. Each party is usually a minority of people in the social community, but is very clever and dares to do everything. The alternating victories between different parties have turned the government into nothing more than a mirror reflecting fragmented, incoherent programs between parties, rather than a state agency with an overall policy. Continuously drafted, systematically arranged, and adjusted based on the common interests of society. Although sometimes the type of government one party holds today and another party holds tomorrow can still meet the common goals of society, in the long run, it will become an effective means by which cunning, ambitious, and dishonest people can destroy the power of the people and seize for themselves the right to rule the government, then destroy the very means that brought them to that unjust position of domination. Dismissal Speech, 1796. You are watching a video on Biography Journey channel. If you like this video, please give us a comment and subscribe to Biography Journey channel to help us reach 100,000 subscribe. Thank you very much.